Hello and welcome to a sunny book nook. Today I'm going to be talking about a bunch of book recommendations for badass women, or for women who are coming into their own, women who are coming into their identity and finding themselves, and just generally grown ass women as well. And these are books that I guess could work for a Christmas list or a holiday gift exchange for someone you know who loves stories about amazing women slash complicated women and them understanding themselves and coming into their identity in their truest, fullest forms. Not to sound like a mindfulness coach or whatever, but yeah, these are all stories of women who are either going through it or who are past the coming of age kind of adolescence necessarily. They're not really adolescents, they're grown and they're figuring things out. These are books for those people. This is by far not an exhaustive list because, first of all, I do not have all of my books with me because some of them are still being shipped in from the East Coast because I'm back home in St. Louis right now. But these are all books I am going to recommend to you that feature a female main character who I think experiences a lot of growth and development and maturity throughout these narratives, or they kind of figure out kind of complex elements of their identity and their lives. So yeah, let's just jump right into it. So the first book that I have here is Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger. This book it's like two novellas basically, and we're following a young woman named Franny and her cousin slash family member Zoe, and these stories are loosely connected, not really though, but even though Zoe, I'm pretty sure, is a dude in the second novella, the first novella about Franny, we follow this college girl named Franny who's a student at Yale, I think, and it's winter break and she's meeting up with her boyfriend basically, and it's kind of the mid-20th century, and it's kind of about her anxieties about her relationship and her place in life, but in this very removed kind of way, in this way that feels very literary, if that makes sense. And I feel like it resonates a lot. This story and this character resonates a lot with kind of people who are not really sure what they're doing and unsure about their relationships and their place in life, and feeling as though they're being suffocated by the expectations and realities around them, for women in their early 20s. I feel like this is what this story is really for. It's kind of meandering and not very plot driven, but the narrative is still very thought-provoking and really, I think, reaffirming for people who aren't really sure about what's going on. So the next book I have here is Normal People by Sally Rooney, which should come to no surprise because this is one of my favorite books of this year and probably of all time, because we're following these two people, this woman and this man, as they graduate high school and they go to college, and they have this on again, off again relationship. It's not very plot driven. It is again focused on these characters, but one of the main characters, Marianne, she is very isolated in her high school environment because she is known as kind of the weird girl. She doesn't really fit in. She's not like other girls, but not in a cringy way, in this genuine seeming way that makes sense for this small Irish town that they're both from. And then they go to college and roles get reversed, in which Marianne is this socialite, a lot of people know her, and the guy, Connell, is more of a recluse. And I thought that this narrative and this story about this young woman and kind of her understanding herself and the trauma of her environments and how she develops in spite of that and because of that, it's just very, I don't know, it's just wonderful to see, in my opinion. And I think that the way that both of these characters kind of impact each other and how one relationship can resonate in this really profound way throughout many different stages of your life. I think that Sally Rooney does a really beautiful job of illustrating that in this novel. There's a lot of fiction out there about featuring romances that don't feel legit at all, but this romantic but realistic story about two people who drift in and out of each other, and their lives cross at different points and then they don't, but they both very much deeply impact each other, and they both experience kind of a profound loneliness as well that marks a lot of people's young adulthood and coming of age. The next book that I have here is another one of my favorite books of all time, which is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. And I think that this story, we follow a bunch of women and people throughout the course of their life, or sometimes a small period of their life, and they all range in a bunch of different ages and backgrounds and experiences, but they're all Black British people, and we kind of see how all of their stories and all of their lives intertwine in a weird way, and in a really realistic way that kind of ties these stories together in this in such a compelling narrative form. And it's so beautiful, it's so gorgeous. We follow this woman as she gets in this abusive lesbian relationship, and like her girlfriend and her move to a commune in the US, and it's kind of the nature of that stranglehold of a relationship to this independent, vivacious young woman. And then we're following this queer playwright and her experiences trying to break into the London theatre scene. And we also follow an immigrant mother and seeing her child grow up, and also like the estrangement from her family and her community. And there's just so many narratives here that I think represents a lot of experiences of a lot of different women and their place in life and their stage in life and at what point they are in their lives. And I just think it's so beautiful, and I would recommend this to anyone. It won the Man Booker for a good reason. It's a really, really fucking good book, and I think it tells the story of women in this really complicated, sophisticated, nuanced sort of way that just, it's so enriching and satisfying. The next book that I have here that features grown women in a predominant way is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. And this book is very good. I'm sure you've already heard of it because of the Hulu show, but I think we follow these suburban family dynamics, but more importantly, we follow these mothers and their experiences and how they deal with the circumstances that they are born into. And I think that Celeste Ng does a beautiful job of delineating how the experiences and paths of the different characters in this book, because we don't just follow these grown women characters, how these women interact with their families and with each other and with their communities is a reflection of who they are as characters, who they are as people. And I think that there's something really realistic about that, and something really true and grounding about this story, that there's a reason why it's very hyped up, and there's a reason why so many people love this story, because it's really fucking good, and I would definitely recommend it. I cannot recommend it enough. So the next book I have here is about a woman, well, obviously, all these books are about women. This book is about a kind of gross woman, kind of an unlikable character. Oh, yeah, and one of the characters in here is very unlikable as well. But the main character, and we're kind of in her point of view, so the grossness and unlikability of her as a character, of Eileen as a character, is really, really important, and it's integral to the story because it is basically what it is about. This is the book Eileen by Otessa Moshfegh, as you can see here. It's set in like the 60s in this small town that she calls Xville, And it's kind of like the framing device is that she is now an old woman looking back on her youth, kind of, or looking back on when she was younger. And she's living with her alcoholic father, who is an ex-cop and a fucking deadbeat. And her mother has died from cancer a couple years ago. And she is working at this jail, or this kind of juvenile detention center for boys. She has this weird stalkerish crush on one of the guards there, and there's this new woman who starts working at the facility named Rebecca, whom she gets into a weird like dynamic with. And we just follow her as she has these really horrible... I'm so sorry about the noise around here. I swear to God, every time I start filming, the leaf blowers come out. Eileen is a really weird, gross character, but she's relatable in that way too. So there are a lot of points in this book that are kind of queasy and not very good feeling, but I think that's really the point. Otessa Moshfegh does a really good job of fleshing out these female characters who are very complicated and unlikable, but who are still really compelling to read about regardless. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book, and even though I wouldn't recommend it universally, I think like people who are okay with that perspective and that kind of unique narrative would really enjoy. And it's a story about a complicated, cool, grown-ass woman. I don't know if she's cool, but like, she's interesting, you know? The next book I have here is another one of my favorites of all time, which is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. And this book is about a woman in like her 20s, I think. Yeah, in her late 20s, who lives in Scotland, I'm pretty sure. And she is very lonesome, very anxious, and very isolated. She's been working at like the same office for years and years now. She doesn't really have any friends. Her life just is of her going home to her little apartment and going to work and getting groceries, and like that's it. Until one day she like kind of strikes up an unlikely friendship with this guy at her work. They help this old man who has like a heart attack in the middle of the street, and she also develops a crush on this random like musician guy in a band. All of this happens within the first like chapter, and she has these repressed traumatic memories and a very strained, difficult relationship with her mother. She's basically all alone in the world at this point. So this book is both like really sad and also just very uplifting, very like heartwarming, I suppose, because we see Eleanor as she comes out of her shell and she comes to realize parts of herself that she didn't know existed, and we see her as she becomes a better person and as she like develops this sense of empathy and care for the world that at the beginning of the book she just really doesn't have, which is what makes her kind of an irritating character at first. But I just think this book is so endearing and so beautiful, and I just think it's so wonderful. It definitely talks about kind of the complicated realities of like being a young woman and being a grown woman at the same time. So highly recommend. The next book that I have here is a little bit different. It is The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. This is a dystopian book. It's translated from Japanese. It was published in the 70s, I believe, and it's about this island that is unnamed, and our main characters are also unnamed, but our main character is this woman who maybe 30-ish. For example, one day you'll wake up and like rose petals will no longer exist, and the memory of them and what they look like and what they smell like will just stop existing in people's minds, except for a certain special person. Some people who can still remember those things that have been disappeared. And it's enforced by like the memory police, which is obviously the title of the story, who kind of make sure that... Oh, is my scarf falling down? who kind of makes sure that things that get disappeared. The main character is an author. Had to readjust my scarf, sorry about that. But yeah, we don't really get to see her process as an author or a writer or anything, because her editor ends up being one of the people who can still remember the things that have been disappeared, and so she has to like put them in hiding. And we kind of follow that, and like how this character, who is kind of like bland, I mean all the characters are, the world is as well, how like they deal with this world and the realities of it. And I think that that narrative of a woman dealing with that shit like is really compelling to read about. And I think that if the concept seems interesting to you, you should check it out, but also don't go into it thinking that you'll be able to understand how the world works, and like that there's gonna be a big dramatic kind of deconstructing of it, because it's more contemplative and very sparse and dry, more so than like an action-packed dystopian thriller. So the last book that I have here about a woman that I think is very compelling and interesting is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. This book is very, very interesting. We follow this young woman who's like in her 20s, in her late 20s. She doesn't really know what she's doing with her life, but she does know that she really likes being the nanny for this little girl. And this is another book that kind of deals with class and race tensions in a very interesting way that is very humorous. Like, I was laughing and cringing out loud so much while reading this book. I think that it explores that feeling of being an adult but like not really knowing what you're supposed to do and what you want to do and where your life is going at all. A lot of things just like happen to this main character, and she kind of just has to like deal with it, and that is very interesting. Like, and we also get the perspective of the woman that she nannies for, this overbearing rich white lady, and her girl boss entrepreneurship business. And I think like these narratives and these stories about these women who like have very different paths in life and have very different like interests and backgrounds and realities is what is really interesting about this book, and their dynamic and what comes of it is just fascinating to see play out. So yeah, this is definitely the book that made me think of even doing this video in the first place, of recommending books about like female main characters who aren't teenagers, and who are kind of unsure about themselves, or who are very sure about themselves, and like how they interact with the world. So yeah, those are all the books that I have for you today. I hope you enjoy this video, even though it's kind of like a niche recommendations, I suppose. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and like, comment, subscribe, all that stupid bullshit. Also, my Goodreads and my Instagram and my Twitter and all of that is linked in the description, so check that out if you want to. And I will see you in my next video. Bye!